full screen with an overview of what we're going to look at for this week and next week. Okay, so we're going to focus on conflict, negotiation, and communication. And I recognize that communication seems to go last, but the reason I'm doing that is because that's going to get into the nitty gritty of communication. That includes things like bias and nonverbal and verbal, which is what you're reading about. So conflict and negotiation are really for context, which means that I didn't give you actually readings about it. I can provide those, but those are really more of an introductory context that I just want you to think about as we go through this, because we're not necessarily focusing on that, but I did want to introduce them for you, especially because we didn't get to do the feedback that we typically do in HR because this online environment doesn't quite lend itself to it. And the emails that I sent you are kind of an experiment. So we're going to see how that goes. So when we think about negotiation, which is really what feedback is, and pretty much anything that we discuss, we can't really talk about negotiation without talking a little bit about conflict. So I went ahead and started us off with conflict. So what is conflict? Usually it has a kind of a negative connotation for us. We think about conflict as something bad, as something scary, as something we want to never, ever experience. But actually, that's not necessarily entirely true. How many of you have ever experienced conflict? I hope I see some little pause. All right.
Always.
How many of you, if you're parents, how many of you experience conflict daily with children? Just kidding. I didn't mean that. I meant that. How many of you have ever experienced conflict in the workplace? Oh my goodness, already got the hands up. Okay, can anybody, what? Okay, so would anybody be willing to share their experience? So it looks like I definitely went to the right place. Would anybody be willing to share their experience? Priyanka, I happen to see your hand up. Would you be willing to, or I don't want to call you out?
Yeah, I can share. I wrote about it in one of the discussion posts, but basically I also work retail and we have to sign people up for a rewards program, but it's free, but a lot of people don't want to sign up. And our management was like cutting hours, like taking people off the register and like getting really mad when we couldn't sign people up. So I kind of like had to talk to them about it.
I remember that. Very good. Very good. And how would you describe that conflict? Like, how did it make you feel?
I really just wanted to quit like the job. So, like, I just like didn't want to come to work anymore.
So if you guys think back, thank you, Priyanka. That's exactly, I mean, that's what happens, right? Our motivation when we feel like we're doing something, because we begin to feel like we're doing something wrong. But in fact, it's this kind of unhealthy conflict, right? So when we think about types of conflict and what it is, oh, I got ahead of myself, so we'll hold on to that. So hold on to that thought. So conflict, what is it? It's a perceived incompatibility, right? So it's a mismatch. At the end of the day, and when we want to define this, it is a mismatch between what we either perceive and what we think should be. So that might sound familiar in terms of process improvements and things like that. But it's also with us, and it has some interdependence. So remember when we were defining organizations and we're defining what an organization is, conflict is also interdependent. And there is interdependence with the perception and realization, right? So what you think should be happening and what is actually happening. And it's unavoidable. So there's some form of interaction. So you can't necessarily avoid it immediately, right? So that's what causes the conflict. This happens a lot in healthcare, right? So the reasons, there are multiple reasons. And so I gave you some of them. There are many more reasons. I'm sure you all can list them. But it is a high stakes job, right? The consequences are significant. If there's a mistake, which is usually one of the biggest fears about conflict, then a person could actually have pretty dramatic consequences, right? An adverse event. But also, it's a highly professionalized field. So does that make sense? It's people that are really well trained. For example, doctors experience a great deal of conflict. Interprofessionals experience a great deal of conflict. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So going back to what Priyanka said, that conflict, whenever there is that mismatch, it's not necessarily always bad, but in the case that it causes such a dramatic mismatch, it can be bad. And it can cause, when you think about Maslow's hierarchy of motivation and needs, it can cause such an interference, such a distraction from your goal achievement that it can actually make you want to just quit. And I've experienced that because it's so overwhelming. So when we think about conflict, like I said, not all of it is bad and not all of it is good. So don't think that you always have to fight, but don't think that always, having conflict is always necessarily bad either. So we kind of think about conflict in two ways. So it's constructive, and which can motivate you, but it can also be dysfunctional. Most of the time, what makes the news, for example, is dysfunctional conflict, right? It's a little bit more exciting, a little bit more destructive, a little bit more toxic. So constructive conflict is considered conflict that contributes to performance. And these are things that lead to competition, right? So it's an achievement. That's how you set a goal, right? So there's a conflict between what you observe and where you want to be. That's a good conflict, right? So that's where we get into stress and eustress and the good kind of stress. But then there's the dysfunctional. And this is where we have burnout, we have toxic environments, we have workarounds, we have fragmentation, et cetera, et cetera. And that's where it interferes or distracts from your tasks, your jobs. And most of the performance issues are due to this kind of bad conflict, right? And so that's where the issues occur with system performance. And so if you kind of think back to your take-home quiz one, you can kind of begin to think about what kind of conflict you had there. So there's different kinds of conflict. Can you guys see that okay? That can be goals. So it can be your goals, like what one goal versus another goal. So let's say you are conflicted between two goals that you desire. Like, do I do this or do I do that, right? It can be cognitive, right? So, well, I think this, but I also think this, and they just don't jive. I don't understand why I'm thinking these two different things. They don't make sense, right? That's kind of a tricky one, right? And that's where the concept of cognitive dissonance, which I think I'm going to mention later down. And then that can be affective. So your emotions, like, has anybody ever been like excited and terrified at the same time? Anybody? Yeah. Okay. Or have you ever been like nauseous and hungry? I don't know. I can't think of it. Okay. Now I'm reaching, guys. And then finally, and more related to the organization, they can be procedural. So it can be a process that doesn't make sense, be it because the way that somebody's job description is stated versus somebody else's perceived job description is stated, or their way of doing things may be in conflict. So these are the different types. I don't care if you remember them, but I just want you to realize that they're pretty much, you get hit on all sides in terms of conflict. And so this influences your ability to make decisions as well, right? So when we think about being managers, and so, all of it comes into play. The sources, we think about the different types of conflict, and then we think about where these conflicts can come from, and the intersection of other elements that can also influence the presence of these types of conflicts. So, oh, hang on, sorry, I have a chat here. Yes, that's great, Tiffany. Public speaking is a great one. It's very exciting. It can be very exciting and exhilarating, but also nauseating. I've given talks where when I was younger, my knees would knock together. I didn't think that actually happened, but it does. But then I'd be like very excited, and then I'll have like memory loss because I won't remember what I said. So yes, that's exactly a great one. And so then we also have things like excuse me, sorry. Oh. Our sources of conflict, or what can create conflict, are our own, does anybody remember it starts with a B, 2 words, our own bounded.
Rationality.
Yes, so that can also help or hinder us when we are either faced with conflict, or they can be the source of our conflict, right? So we need to think about that. And some of the preliminary responses to the bias quiz are phenomenal, because I see a lot of self-awareness, and I think that's wonderful. And there's ways that you can combat that. And I can actually see some of you actually adjusting when you do the second one. So I thought that was wonderful. So we talk about prejudices, discrimination. When we'll talk a little bit about cross-cultural. Social categorization is a huge one, and that's related to bounded rationality, because we only know what we know. The other one is, have you guys ever heard of the Robbers Cave study?
Is that related to Plato's cave?
Oh, I'm afraid I don't know Plato's cave, so I couldn't tell you. Is it related to conflict?
Well, kind of, because what you see, it's not always the reality. Is it similar to that? I'll wait to hear, and then I'll know.
Potentially. Now I'm curious. You'll have to give me more on that. So let me tell you Robbers Cave, and you tell me. But essentially, Robbers Cave study it was a homogenous group of boys that were then split and told that they were different, right? So it was the same group of boys. They went out to a camp. Then they were defined as different and made to compete on resources. And so they self-determined and created conflict so that they would create that group cohesion to survive, to compete for resources. And so this happens, think Civil War, right? The same group of people living in the same area, so on and so forth. And civil, but meaning the same population, not like US Civil War, because that's a whole other dilemma. And then the prisoner's dilemma is another type of conflict. And so I don't know, Monica, if that's similar. But we create conflict. We literally create conflict to survive and compete for resources. And then another one would be something like the prisoner's dilemma, which has a power construct to it. Has anybody heard of the prisoner's dilemma? Yes? A little bit, maybe no?
Is this the one where they're like in 2 separate rooms and they say that like your friend is going to flip on you if you don't tell her, something like that? Okay. So
it's choosing in our self-interest versus, so it's a question of cooperation versus self-interest. And we'll talk about that in terms of, that's one of the key premises for conflict management. Okay, so thinking about these things, we're going to talk a little bit about 5 sources of conflict, 5 levels of conflict, sorry. So the first 2 are sort of individualized, and the last 3 are group and organizational. So the first 2, and I'm going to try to go through these pretty quickly because we're trying to get to negotiation. The first 2 are within you and between you individually, right? So intrapersonal is within you. You don't need to worry about this stuff. I want you to just worry about the things that sources are things like 2 desirable choices. That actually is conflict, right? That's good conflict. Like 2 great jobs, 2 great restaurants, 2 great boyfriend. I don't know, something, right? The second one is 2 bad choices. Like, I don't want either, but you're going to get stuck with one. So the necessary evil, I forgot what it's a cliche, I can't recall it. And then lastly, and this is the hardest one, which is usually life, is that what's called the rock in the hard place, or the catch-22, which is there's desirable and undesirable elements to each choice, and that makes it much harder, right? And so that's where cognitive dissonance can occur, and it can be related to kind of who's involved in that conflict, who's affected, so on and so forth. So these are the conflicts that occur within you. And then there's conflicts that occur between people. And this is where we talk a lot about differences, right? And a big one is personal characteristics, personal beliefs, bounded rationality. That's a huge one. A lot of it has to do with our perspective, which is usually wrong. Because the way we perceive something and the way that the other person is perceiving it is usually not right. We can only perceive what we perceive, and that's it. But we attempt to address issues by perceiving both sides, and typically without communicating. And that leads to assumptions, right? And that's usually the problem. So what happens? Remember how I'm obsessed with definitions? That is a major solution point. And so the solution for by the way, for intrapersonal conflict, again, it's very much clarifying what you want. Well, that's the whole like self-awareness, emotional intelligence, right? For interpersonal, the solution is to clarify and define, clarify tasks and expectations, and find that middle ground, find your shared goals, right? So that's how you deal with interpersonal conflict. So far, so good? Okay. And I want you thinking about these in the context of leadership and between you and other colleagues, because some of you, I found, did such an interesting job with discussing Nurse Wilson. No, wait. Yeah. Oh, shoot. I always mess up the nurse and the supervisor. Yeah.
No, it is Dorothy Wilson. The nurse was Dorothy Wilson.
Yeah. So Nurse Wilson had a lot of what seemed to be a lot of issues, right? And so some of you, though, took a really broad look at her her documented issues, and then also took a broader perspective. And that's what you really need to do to be a good leader and to save your own self some conflict. And so when we talk about clarifying tasks and expectations, it also means taking this other role of just going with the absolute opposite of what everybody else is saying, so that you can broaden your entire perspective. You may not necessarily agree with it. So that doesn't mean you go with it. That doesn't mean you accept it. But it's something that allows you to make sure you are checking out the entire field so that you can find shared goals. And some of you did, and it was wonderful because you mentioned aligning it with the goals of the organization and bringing Nurse Wilson back in from the perspective of the goals of the organization. So having it be more of a positive and motivating shared goals perspective versus a more punitive perspective, and as one of the alternatives. And I thought that was a really great idea. And the reason you want to do that is because otherwise you find yourself trapped in what's called a Cartman drama triangle. And that's and I get that it's red and orange. So the Cartman drama triangle is the red text. And I apologize because I'm usually better about this in terms of color blindness. So it's the italicized text to the left of the text in the triangle. So when we look at victim, persecutor, and rescuer, that is the drama triangle. So what ends up happening is that when there is interpersonal conflict and people get drawn in, that's typically called the Cartman drama triangle. And so it sort of becomes a vicious cycle of he said, she said. And so the idea is move into this. I don't like the name of this. I feel like it's cheesy, but it's really stepping out of that cycle and turning it into more of a solution-oriented, self-created solution, right? So when you're the manager, let's say 2 employees are coming to you with a conflict, then you help your creator and challenger recognize their own solutions, as opposed to you being the rescuer. So I think this is I like this in terms of the blue text, which is the more substantial text underneath the larger text. So owns power and chooses and responds, and then calls for learning and growth. So it's a double, more of a balanced element, and that does make them more accountable. And it takes the manager or the third party out of this position of rescuer so that they're in the middle of it and into an external, more of a supportive role. And in general, as you build your own self-awareness and your own emotional intelligence, you can think of your own conflict handling modes. Most people are pretty good about deciding what their conflict handling mode is by looking at this. Oh, is this blocking it? Oh, drat. But essentially, the red arrow or the y-axis is about you. What's important to you, your needs, your goals, your desires. So that's your kind of Maslow element. And the x-axis is related to cooperation, collaboration, how much you care about other, like how important it is to maintain the organization, the peace, if you will, right? And so if you are kind of fine on your needs, you're not, you're fine on how you feel, and you're not really interested in a lot of cooperation, then you're going to avoid conflict. So if there is a conflict, you're not too worried about yourself, but you're also not too worried about what happens to your team, the organization, whatever. That's conflict avoidance, right? So do you kind of see how to read this? And then let's say you really just care about making everybody happy at the expense of your own needs. Does anybody know what that might be? If you are only interested in making everybody else's needs met and putting your needs last, what would that be?
Accommodating.
Yes, very good. And let's say you only care about your needs and forget everybody else. Yes, Gabby, now say it without the mute, because I couldn't hear you. Still can't hear you. Why can't I hear you? Is it my volume?
Competing? No.
Yes. Yes. So does everybody see why? So competing is less focus on others' needs and really saying, this is what I care about. So I want to push the power. I want the power struggle to go in my favor. Right? So it's a little bit less collaborative. And then if you see the last two, what do you think the last two are there? Compromising and collaborating. Of the two, which one do you think is the ideal? In an ideal world, of course.
Collaborating.
Collaborating. And why? You knew that was coming, so.
Both sides win with like minimal amount of like giving up on their priorities.
So does that always happen?
Definitely not.
Good. So typically collaborating is ideal, but usually you won't get anything done, right? So collaborating is great, but that usually doesn't help you reach a decision. So under a leadership function, when you're thinking about in leadership and management terms, you'll probably end up in somewhere between compromising and collaborating, because ultimately you do need to make decisions and you need to get things done, right? And so what'll end up happening is maybe you won't please everybody, but you will get things done. So keep that in mind, that you can't please all of the people all the time when you are in a leadership position. But yeah, collaborating is fantastic, like with your friends and whatnot. That doesn't mean that it's going to get there every single time. So let's move into any questions about individual conflict. Okay, moving into group conflict. So when we think about group conflict, there's within your group conflict, right? So inside a group, and then there's between group conflict. So what might that look like in an organization? What might within group conflict look like?
Maybe like a union battles kind of thing.
Yeah, well, actually, I wonder, would that be more inter-organizational?
Oh, maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, so let's think about both of those, because that could be intergroup though. Intergroups. Oh, let's do inter. Okay.
I could see it being intra-group, especially because like if you're negotiating, there might be different people within the negotiating group that have different priorities. So like some people might want to be like more aggressive. Some people might want to take a certain offer, or some people might want to strike, some people might not. So you're gonna have to like manage that intergroup conflict in order to come to a place where you're like united to negotiate.
So you're saying within, when you're even deciding when you're deciding on what you want to even negotiate about. Yes, that's absolutely true. Actually, Ryan, I'm not sure what you mean, if you mean between the union and the leadership. So I should have asked that to clarify.
For sure. Yeah, I think Alana just really helped out my thought
That's
process.
good. You guys have each other's backs. Good. So when we think about intergroup, it can typically be groups within the same organization. So when I'm picturing a union negotiation, that's usually an external party will come in because a union is usually represented. So an external representative will come in and negotiate on behalf of the unionized employees. So that's sort of an external organization, if you will, that comes to negotiate with leadership. But it could be intergroup because the members are within the, so that's kind of a gray area. It's almost like intra and inter-org. So that's like that's one of the gray areas, because none of these are going to be fixed. So you pick the hard one. But yes, another intergroup conflict could be like nurses and physicians. It could be clinical and administrative, right? Because you guys have different goals. So the intergroup is thinking about goals. It might be helpful to show you the write-up. So intragroup is going to be where some or all of the group members are going to defer on either relationships, the tasks, so what you want to do or how you're going to do it, right? And again, honestly, the key is definitions first and foremost, but also delegation. So make sure everybody has a job and that they have ownership over those jobs. And the same thing so when you think about intragroup applies, right? So as we shift into intergroup, make sure you keep in mind intragroup, right? So keep that in mind, because otherwise you're going to have intragroup and intergroup, but you're going to have that same intragroup and the discord between the groups. So you can have vertical, horizontal, and line staff. So there's that power, the authority is power. And so Priyanka's example is a great example of intergroup discord. And diversity is another intergroup conflict that we can think about. And lastly, it can be inter-org, and that's kind of what you were talking about, Ryan. And so there's definite cultural gender components. And I'm trying to see if, I don't want to get into every single one, but other sources are things like strategic changes, interdepartmental coordination, resources. Power is such a big one that I can't even tell you, because not only is it seniority, it's gender, it's age, it's race, ethnicity, it's equity, who makes how much money. So we talked a lot about that in HR in terms of salaries. Do I see a hand up?
Yes, Dr. S. Can
Yes.
you go a slide back, the previous slide? So the sources of conflict in organizations, so these will come under both intra and inter, or this is just for inter groups?
This can be, well, usually this is within the group, it's usually more personality based, right?
Okay.
But again, it's about the tasks to do. And so actually, no, it's going to be all groups. So
All groups. Yeah, that's what I
yeah,
thought.
because it's not just what to do, but it's how to do
How
it.
to do it. Okay, got it.
Because the task and the process, right? So it's what are we going to do and how are we going to do it? Which is usually what people differ on, right?
Yes.
What do we want to do and how do we want to do it? So that's a really good question. So basically, so as we get into negotiation, there's two main elements with conflict resolution. So if you don't take anything, one is, honestly, avoidance is the best course of action unless you have to enter into conflict, believe it or not. So, because most of the time, it's not really a conflict, it's really differences, right? So you have to take that into account because it may not be interdependent. So most of the time, believe it or not, the perception, and this is really talking about groups, but for yourself individually or interpersonal, we think that more things are interdependent than they are, and that's a perception issue. But it's really people's own just opinions or thoughts. That's not interdependence. Do you guys see the difference? So interdependence is the key to conflict. There has to be interdependence to conflict. Most of the time we confuse our perceptions and our emotions for interdependence. It's not. So that's why avoidance is the best course, because there's usually not that. Then you should resolve them quickly and constructively. So the reason I say that is when we think about back to the Wilson example, there was a lot of perception that wasn't necessarily interdependent, that wasn't necessarily related to conflict, that muddied a lot of the waters, right? So for example, the nurse's educational background and their job history did not really have an impact on whether or not they were hired, because they were hired at the point that they were hired at, right? So that was a perception versus an interdependence. There was truly no conflict. So that's where you have to be careful. Where is this a conflict or is this just my perception? And I need to be really careful about that line. Okay. And the goal ultimately is for resolutions that are the best outcome possible, not just for the goal, which is aligned with the organizational vision, mission, value, blah, 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 but also for the people. So you have to think about, so you definitely do want to think about, you know, the people that you work with and the relationships and cooperation, blah, blah, blah. But you really want to think about the alignment with the organization as well. So when we think about relationships involved, don't forget the organization. Okay. So just a little reminder, conflict resolution. This is another slide of that Thomas Kilmann model. It's a little bit nicer looking because the other one was a little bit busy. So you see how pretty that is? Okay, yay, it's pretty. I know it looks like there's 50 slides, there's not. So how do conflict and negotiation kind of fit together? Again, avoidance is the first step. The other one is giving in, right? So that's where you're like, okay, it's not worth dealing with. I'm just going to do it. The next one is forced acceptance. So you see how conflict leads to negotiation? It's a power struggle. You need to do it. It's in your best interest at the end of the day, or sometimes acceptable in emergency situations. For example, you're going to get something else in the long run. But lastly, and probably the best one, is negotiation. And this is preferred. It's resource intensive. This is going to be what you do, for example, when you're negotiating your evaluations, when you're negotiating for jobs, when you're negotiating for salary. I want you to think about this in terms of all of the different things. So when you're offered a job, for example, and you're not prepared, you're giving in. If you're offered a job and told no because you feel like you've been kind of corralled, don't be forced to accept something. Think negotiation, okay? So this is when you're thinking about jobs, when you're thinking about job description, because this can apply to anything. So negotiation, what is it good for? Does everybody kind of understand how how conflict helps us become better negotiators? Like, well, you don't know what negotiation is just yet. But. So we're shifting into negotiation. So what is negotiation? What is it good for? First of all, negotiation is a process. It's not like a switch. There's no like, it kind of goes back to our motto. If you've seen one, you've seen one. So you have to tailor negotiation.
Am I tripping or is this frozen?
No, she's frozen. I think
It's
she's
frozen.
doing something.
Okay.
I think she's having some problems with her computer.
I thought her kid walked in.
I think she's being really still.
Are these all the alternatives to our problem?
We can't hear her, right?
Did she just log out? I think maybe.
Is she gone now?
Where's the co-host?
Me.
Who's
There
gonna
we
Now, now you have to teach us negotiation.
Yeah, who's a good negotiator?
Yeah, now I'm the host, so I think she left.
Yeah, the responsibility's on you now, Cami.
Yikes.
But also, has anybody ever like negotiated at a job or a job offer?
Oh wait, I think she's back.
Oh, okay, never mind. You're muted.
Yeah.
It says you're muted on our site.
Still muted.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Finally,
Yeah.
my screen was totally blank. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. Okay. Can you see me? I'm like totally thrown off here.
We can see, I can see you, Dr. S.
Okay, hold on. Let me find my bearings again. So sorry about that, you guys. I don't know what happened. My computer just died, but it's back to life. So, okay, on that note, let me jump to the good stuff. So, what is negotiation good for? But essentially, it's a process. And again, it has that interdependence. So remember how we talked about conflict is interdependent? This is sort of the better part of conflict. It's what you want instead of conflict, right? Where you come to a decision versus a struggle. So a conflict is an interdependence of struggle, whereas negotiation is an interdependence where a decision is made and there's some mutual benefit, right? So there's struggle and benefit. That's probably the best way to say it in a nutshell. Oh, drat. What's happening here? Oh, I hate when this does that. Okay, so here are some common problems in negotiation that we make often, especially if we are inexperienced, first time out on the market, or just kind of afraid or shocked, if we're just not well, if we don't even know that we can negotiate, to be honest with you, is that we leave money on the table. And so that's the lose-lose negotiation because we don't even know that we can negotiate. And that's where we don't value ourselves enough. We aren't well prepared for our negotiation.
Sorry, are you sharing your screen with us by any chance?
Oh, damn it.
No. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, the slides are on the canvas, by the way, but drat. This totally threw me off. Okay, so leaving money on the table, settling for too little. So You think that because, the increase in your first salary out of school is great, you don't realize your value. That's another one. You walk away from the table because you're mad. That happens more often than we think. Or we walk away from a great opportunity because we don't think we can do better, right? And then lastly, we settle for less, okay? So these are things that happen all the time. Why do they happen to us? Oh my gosh, I hate these things. I can't turn these off either. Because not why, in general, we are all bad negotiators because we're human. Why? Because inherently we want to be liked. We want to make people happy. We want to seem agreeable. But what ends up happening is that an organization is seeking to make the best possible deal for itself, right? And that includes other people, especially those that have this experience. So if you have that in mind, it's going to already put you up ahead. Because the other thing is that we have this, and believe it or not, it's almost egocentric, is that we believe that the organization or somebody will see this inherent value in us and magically tell us our value. I'm here to tell you that that will not happen. That is not the case. You have to speak for your value. And I know that that probably is already making some of you uncomfortable because it is uncomfortable, but you can do it. So the other thing is though, is that you have to be prepared to make these negotiations. So this is a conflict because it's really, really uncomfortable from our normal operating capacity, right? Which is that we're agreeable. We don't want to say, well, no, I disagree. You need to give me this. I'm worth this. And so these are the primary reasons that we're bad negotiators. And most of the time, it's also just because we don't know. And that's actually probably the biggest reason. We just don't know. And we're afraid to be wrong. We're afraid that they'll say, well, forget it. No, we don't want you. You're not that, because that's a human fear. And there's different kinds of negotiations. We're not going to go into a lot of them because you guys aren't negotiating contracts. But what I want you to realize is, especially for those of you negotiating jobs, there's several different ones. I want you to think about it in terms of, one, the pie is usually not going to get any bigger. And you want to think about something that's going to benefit both parties, because that's the best those two types of mentalities are going to give you the best possible outcome. Because when you can think of a way to benefit all parties, with the construct of maybe if the salary is not going to get bigger, there's externalities, there's other benefits that are non-monetary, then you're going to do the best job of the negotiation. So the negotiation styles are distributive, integrative, and interactive. And there's a lot of material online, so definitely look it up. So when we think about distributive negotiation, there's different ones. There's, the nicknames are I Want It All, Time Warp, Good Cop, Bad Cop, Ultimatum. And these are probably the ones that you're most familiar with. And that's basically where you are very extreme. You put a deadline, which is similar to the ultimatum. So you're like, I need to know the answer by such date. Or you say, this is what you get, take it or leave it. Or you have that good cop, bad cop. If you've never heard of that, then you say, this is the good things. And these are the reasons why, if you don't do this, then this is your loss. But the most important thing, I think, to be a good negotiator is the BATNA. So this is for anything that you ever do, go buy a car, whatever. This is the BATNA. Does anybody know what a BATNA is? Has anybody ever heard of a BATNA? No? So it's called the best alternative to negotiated agreement. Anybody? No? Okay. So your BATNA is the result of you doing your homework, of you knowing your value, of what you have in mind. And it's what you think about when you go into a negotiation, be it for a job, be it between a manager, or be it between you and an employee that you're arguing with, knowing what your bottom line is. So let's say you're arguing a salary. Let's make it simpler. Let's say you're buying a car, and let's say that it's called the reservation price. Don't worry about that. But your BATNA minimum, your love price is 10,000, and the car is listed at 15,000. So when you go in to negotiate, you say, I'll give you 7,000. Why do you go below the BATNA? Well, because 7,000 is your anchor, and your anchor is where you start your negotiation. And the key is also always to try to be the first one to offer, right? So when an employee, for example, is, and this may not be so easy with an employee that's on a plan and things like that, but when you're trying to offer like a performance improvement plan, you need to have an idea. It may not necessarily be monetary. It may be certain tasks, a certain deadline, things like that. You need to think about what's the minimum of the tasks or achievement that you need for them to do a good job. So it needs to be something above that 7,000. So ours is 10,000. So then the person that wants 15,000 is like, I want 15,000 for the car. And you say, well, I'm offering 7,000. And they're like, okay, I'll do 13,000. And you'll say, no, I'll give you 8,000. So you're still not at your BATNA, which you never say that 10,000, right? That's how much you're willing to pay, which you're happy with, you're satisfied with, you'll feel good about your value, right? And you keep working up until that point, because at 10,000 or maybe 11,000, you're willing to walk away, but they don't know that. And so you're trying to meet that point, but at the same time, as you negotiate, you'll keep saying, hey, look, I'm already all the way up to 9,000, and from 7,000, look how much you've already talked me up. So that anchor point is a cognitive indicator for them to show that you've already negotiated. So you're basically showing that you're willing to move, you're willing to negotiate, you're negotiating with them, but they need to meet you somewhere in the middle. Does that kind of make sense? Yes, Monica. Yes. So does everybody kind of get how the BATNA works? So what's another situation? Has anybody ever negotiated? Let's start there. Thanks, Crystal. Has anybody ever been in a position to negotiate? So, go ahead. Yes.
I negotiated my salary, but my biggest fear the whole time is if you go too high, they're gonna just laugh in your face and like kick you out.
Great example. So if you go too high, see, but that's the thing. That's the negotiation part. So let's say, and let's think about it in terms of this, right? Because you're not really going too high. The high is the starting point, but the high should never be your BATNA, because then you have no room to negotiate. Because if your happy place price, your fall in love price, your whatever, your BATNA is also the high price, then you're already out of the game. You're already going to be unhappy. So you should go above that. And all of you, for your information, should never, ever, ever accept the first offer you're given. Let me go back to, because that is called what? That's called the winner's curse, right? or agreement bias, call it whatever you want, but you never accept the first offer because you're also setting a precedent. Do you know why?
Because they think that we won't negotiate or ask for more, that you're just going to accept what's offered, to the next time they might not try to add a little more to it.
Maybe it's not more, but it's that you're not considering your value. Even if they don't have it, because they need to tell you that they don't have it. You need to make them tell you they don't have it. And the other thing, what else can you do if they don't have it? Anybody?
You can try to negotiate for other benefits or types of compensation that maybe aren't financial.
Very good. Can we remember from the CEO compensation what else we could negotiate for? Especially
Benefits,
in your positions? I'm sorry, it's a lot. Go ahead.
fringe benefits.
Like what? What else could we do?
Equity.
Equity, PTO.
Very good. What else? Especially in things like the pandemic.
Do you mean like
Health
working
insurance.
conditions? Sorry.
Sorry. Go ahead again. Taylor and then Tiffany.
Health insurance and like
Better be
insurance,
health insurance.
like post job too.
Okay. Tiffany?
I was just saying like working conditions, like work from home or
Yes, very good. Very good. Equip
Maybe job title.
title, very good, very good. Okay, anything else? What about professional development? So conference travel. Okay, so these are all possibilities that you can, in your head, so these are the fall in love elements that you can add to your reservation price. But what do you need to have? You need to be ready with these things when you go into a negotiation. Do not show up and be like, I don't know, because guess what? You'll get killed because they've been doing it for years. So they're going to be ready for you. You need to be ready for them. And that includes also with your employees, right? Because otherwise you'll end up inflating a performance score, right? So these are the things that you want to be prepared for. Okay. All right. Any questions? Ay, Dios mío. I don't know how I did this. So distributive negotiation, same idea. Final thought, and then, oh, did I not mention anchors? I mentioned anchor, right? And then if they make the first offer, immediately re-anchor. So do you guys understand how anchoring works?
No.
So like what Tiffany was mentioning, let's say we go from the salary. So let's say when you're negotiating a salary, so let's forget the car example. Let's say we're negotiating salary and they say, we offer, if they offer first, so ideally you want to offer first and you want to say $100,000 and they're like, yeah, no. And they'll say 50,000 and you say no, right? So you keep going. Your anchor is what?
100,000?
Very good. And let's say your happy place, your BATNA, your like joy is, let's meet in the middle, 75, right? So you keep moving towards that 75 as much as you humanly can, right? Without, and I'll tell you the end in a minute. But let's say they offer first and they say, we're offering you 65. And you're like, oh crap, they went first. So you have to offer above your happy place, but you probably can't hit 100 because it's probably too high, right? So what do?
Maybe closer to our BATNA, maybe, I don't know, 85.
There you go. You still stay above your BATNA because you still want to be able to say, look how far I've come down. Because they're going to pull, look how far we've gone up. So remember that. So you need to have the same argument, okay? And that's the whole immediately re-anchor and pay attention, take notes. And don't be afraid to negotiate. Okay?
Professor,
Yeah.
Oh, just wanted to let you know that Cami told me that her Wi-Fi went down, so she got kicked out of the meeting, but she's trying to restart it, but she was your co-host.
Oh no! Who's coming? Who's gonna pick up the slack? Well, I'll watch out for her. Or Tiffany, you're next after my name. Do you mind if I put you as my co-host? Oh no, you have to go because you have work.
Yeah, there's another Tiffany if he wants to do it. Sorry.
Tiffany coming as a co-host.
I can do it.
Oh, thank you, Tiffany.
I put my hand up for a question.
Oh, please, just don't raise your hands, guys, because I won't see it sometimes. So just jump on in, please. I don't mind at all.
Well, first, thanks, Tiffany, for taking that. Sorry about that. Second, I was curious how you renegotiate for a salary if you don't have as much leverage because they're not, trying to entice you to like join the job, and you can't say, oh, market analysis or other people are making this. Like, what does that conversation look like?
So my first answer is no. That's a great question, which is if negotiating before you accept the job was like 100%, negotiating once you sign and are in, it is damn near impossible. It is so hard because they have you. That's why this is so critical before you signed on. Now, if you are, the only way to really do that, and I'm happy to do this offline because I know we're running out of time, is to have another offer in hand to leverage. So that's a whole other can of beans. Yeah, your teacher's Mexican, okay? But it's leverage because you have to have a lot more documentation. You have to, I mean, it's just a lot harder. And it's not impossible, mind you, it's not impossible, but it's damn near impossible because they have you and they know that it's, you're happy there because you're there. Otherwise, you're not that unhappy there because you're there. So do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but since we all are going to graduate with an MPH, is that not also a tool to leverage to say, hey, now I have another postdoc?
That's a great point. When do you negotiate the MPH transition? Anybody know? Especially if you're interviewing before you graduate. When would you negotiate the MPH salary increase?
Is it still before you accept the offer?
I know. But that's a good leverage point. So let's talk, because that is true. That is one possibility. But again, it's not as strong as now. It's not as strong as a priority, but it's definitely there. Nothing is impossible. I believe that. Nothing is impossible. And it's always free to ask as long as you don't mind hearing no. And guess what? No is fine.
But rejection hurts.
Hey, I'm a PhD student. When I was a PhD student, I got rejected all the time. It's fine. I mean, all my hair fell out and this isn't my real hair color, but it's fine. No, but it does hurt. It does hurt. And that's why you have to have like peer support. That's why you have your cohort and you come and you cry and you say bad words and you drink some wine, but you keep at it. You keep at it. You don't give up. That's the other thing, because you got to recognize it's not you at all. Okay.
I think it also can help, like, if you're having conversations with your supervisor about what your goals are, or like, if you have financial goals that you want to meet or career goals, and then they might like advocate for you more if you're saying like, if you have more leverage, maybe because you have an MPH or for whatever reason, they might be more willing to work with you. Maybe.
It's just that usually those decisions are not made by your supervisors. That's really the rub. It's really because the position, when it is classified, you come in through HR. And so when all of that classification is occurring, it happens at the beginning. That's why it's so challenging. But like I said, it's not impossible. And transitioning to an MPH is a really good leverage point. So like I was saying, when you have either another offer in hand or something like the MPH, there's definitely, now there are other positions where, you know, they don't care about the MPH. That's something to think about when you're interviewing an organization too, right? So, you know, I have a student not in this class that she asked about it. She said, and they said, well, we don't care about that. And that's something to think about too. If that's something when you're interviewing the organization. So that might not even have any impact worth the negotiation. It might be useless, but that's something for you to decide if that's, you know, does it matter to you? Is it in your BATNA still? Okay. These are all wonderful questions. And, you know, one of the things is I really want to do additional talks on this because I end up finding that it's really helpful. So I'm always helpful desserts. And I'm always willing to do extra talks on these things because like I said, I realized like we need to do this because communication is important, but I want you guys to have the context of why. And it's because of this, the conflict, the negotiation, the interpersonal dynamics. And we're not even talking about groups yet because I think we're gonna have, I'm gonna shift it to 646 or somewhere because we are doing groups. There's so much content, but I don't want to overwhelm you guys. So let me jump into the next part of negotiation. But yeah, let's keep this conversation going. And if you guys want, we can totally do like a little extra group on more negotiation if you guys want. Just we'll do like a little special session or something, like a happy hour on rejection and negotiation. My favorites. Only I get to drink my wine. All right, I'll keep moving and then because I know we're running out of time. So another type of negotiation, and again, this is good also with your BATNA. So don't leave your BATNA behind, but it's about finding the common ground, right? So the integrative negotiation, which is like considered the kinder, gentler negotiation. So the initial distribution, right? Resources. This is more about we all emerge happy. Because the first one, the pie is like the pie doesn't get bigger. This one is more about like everybody this is more feel good. And so this is more about interests. Everybody's happy. We're all going to be okay. You know, this is great. So I like a combination of the two. So interest-based negotiation is actually really supported by the federal government. And it's really important. And this one really emphasizes the entanglement of our perceptions, assumptions, emotions. And I love that because it really forces you to think about how much you're getting your emotions stuck in the game. So you really want to think about not your interests, not your positions, right? So the first one, the distributive is more about what I want. This is more about how do we find a mutual ground? Still the BATNA, still, you know, but it's like, what can I do for them? So this is one that might be beneficial when you're in the job and trying to negotiate. And so this is like thinking about, and this is one example. This is a Cold War negotiation, talking about self-interest and then enlightened interest. And I can give you more about this information, but it was kind of cool because it included the importance of goodwill and this is a famous negotiation. This is the figure that emerged from it. It's called the Walk in the Woods, and it's a famous negotiation of the 1982 meeting between two Cold War nuclear arms reduction negotiators. Paul Nitze leading the US delegation, and Yuli Vitsinski, who led the delegation from the Soviet Union. And this is how their negotiations were characterized. So, so they really talk about the importance of interpersonal interactions. And this was in the middle of an impasse, like a really bad impasse. So those of you, and now I'm about to feel super old, but y'all know what the Cold War was, right? Yeah. Google it, okay? Just Google it. so that I don't cry. But it was a bad thing between the US and the former Soviet Union. But this occurred in Geneva, Switzerland. And they shared their concerns and their interests and their objectives, right? So their positions. And they began to see, they began to reach a true understanding of each other's, not just their positions on what they wanted, but also what their shared desires were in terms of this hot mess of an arms race. That's what the Cold War was. Okay. But it was really neat because this really humanizes the whole element of negotiation, decision analysis, and whatnot. So I thought this was kind of cool. So when you think about negotiation, and I like the interest-based negotiations, think about it as a walk. It's a process where you're really trying to get to a shared common ground. Okay. And then the last part is bring in a third party. But that's obviously not ideal because that's a stranger, but that might be the best. So that's mediation, right? And this gives you an idea of kind of how negotiation works, how it escalates. I'm sorry. What does it mean to escalate a conflict? See how we go from conflict, negotiation, mediation, and then all the best. So this is how we prepare for negotiation. So when you're thinking about your negotiation, know your BATNA, know what you care about, know what you want. So the first thing you want to do is, what's my castle in the sky desire, right? So with a conflict with work, what's the castle in the sky desire? Like you hate your job, you want to leave that. Okay, what's the flip side of that? And then start from there, you should be able to tease out your BATNA and then do your homework. And then identify alternatives. Oh my gosh, is this starting to sound like a case study? A little bit, I know. Because I know, I repeat myself, dare I do. And you can read through these. And then when you're inside the negotiation, you are with somebody else, right? It's a dance. And you're both working on brainstorming. You're both thinking of solutions. So don't think about your brainstorming. Don't think of it as driving. Think of it as dancing. If you don't dance, then think of it as something that, like, I don't know what's else, something that, think of it as a mirror. I can't think of anything else. I dance, that's all I can think of. Salsa dancing in particular. Outside the negotiation, and this is before, we'll talk about after too, but think of a plan B. What happens if it fails? Go in like a chess player, assuming you'll win, assuming you'll succeed, assuming you'll find common ground, okay? So always go into a negotiation assuming it's gonna go how you desire. You're gonna hit your BATNA, everything's gonna be great. But always prepare for that plan B, okay? And when you go in, these are some of the ways you think about framing. These are some of the ways that you can prepare, right? And you guys can read this. Things that you want to think about: norms and bias, power, objectives, be human. A negotiation is between people. This is the whole, now Monica Plato's cave stuck in my head. What was the cave I presented? Robber's cave. Do not dehumanize your collaborator, your negotiation partner. Never dehumanize them because your negotiation just fell apart. And it became a conflict. The way you make a negotiation into a conflict is dehumanizing them. And the same idea with cross-cultural, right? Us, them, that's absolutely how you can do that. And then you guys can read through these, but one of the other big drawbacks of negotiation is worrying about saving face, how you will look. Rejection, for example, is painful, but sincerity is important. Vulnerability is important, right? And so that is okay. Maybe in that respect, maybe the other person may not behave that way, worry about what you can control, which is your behavior. You can't control the other person. And maybe they're going to become a horrible, terrible person. That's their problem, not yours. And again, focus on your interests. So these are the positions, because this is how you get to solutions, okay? And most importantly, think of the mutual goal. What do you both want, right? What do you both want? Do not make it personal. Do not make it personal. As my mentor told me with negotiation, be ready to leave a nickel on the table. So that's the whole integrative is be ready to leave a little bit. So even if you're winning a negotiation, you're doing really well, it always behooves you to leave a nickel on the table. Does everybody know that? I know it's kind of an idiomatic phrase, but always think of that person and think of the mutual benefit. So don't take everything, even when you can. That includes an employee's dignity, somebody weaker than you, a much higher salary that maybe will stress you so much that you can't maintain it, anything like that. Leave a nickel on the table. And in the words of the late great philosopher, Kenny Rogers, be ready to walk away, or know when to hold them, know when to run, okay? I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's, or this song, but you gotta know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, and ideally you'll never need to run, especially if you leave that nickel on the table. So that's a key, that's great advice for life in general. And these are some of the things that you can think about afterwards, especially when you're thinking about learning from every negotiation, how to change it, how to follow up, and most importantly, maintain those relationships. Don't burn the bridge unless you really need to, and then you better run. And that's it. That's it. The rest are reference slides for you guys. But conflict and negotiation, like I said, are two sides of the same coin. They're mitigated by communication, which we're going to talk about because there's no clear rules. But I wanted to give you guys the context of conflict and negotiation. We'll save the emails I sent you. We'll get to those next week. And I apologize for so many slides, but I hope that you got a good little bird's eye view of an owl's eye view of negotiation today. I'm going to stop the recording now and answer any questions. Thanks, everyone.